The storm that brought Silas Kane to Serenity Creek was a thing of biblical fury. It descended from the Dragoon Mountains without warning, a churning, bruised purple wall of cloud that swallowed the sun and unleashed a torrent of rain so thick it seemed to turn the very air to water. The town's single, dusty street became a river of mud, and the wind shrieked like a banshee, tearing at the signs of the general store and the livery. For Eleanor Vance, standing in the relative sanctuary of her father's clinic, the storm was a familiar, if unsettling, symphony of the wildness that always pressed in at the edges of their small, civilized world. The clinic, a sturdy, two-story clapboard building, was the town's anchor. It smelled of carbolic acid, dried herbs, and her father's pipe tobacco sense of healing and quiet contemplation. Eleanor, at 24, was as much a part of it as the neat rows of glass-stoppered bottles and the well-worn medical texts. She had her father's calm demeanor and steady hands, but her mother's compassionate eyes. She had been born and raised in this room, and she believed, with a quiet certainty, that she would die here, having lived a useful, peaceful, and predictable life. God have mercy on any soul caught out in this, her father, Dr. Alistair Vance, murmured, his reflection a ghostly image in the rain-streaked window. He was a man whose gentle nature was belied by a face etched with the harsh realities of a frontier doctor's life. He had seen everything from childbirth to gunshot wounds, and he met it all with the same weary, unshakable resolve. As if in answer, a sound cut through the roar of the storm, a frantic, desperate pounding on the clinic's front door. It wasn't the polite knock of a neighbor. It was the sound of a fist beating a panicked rhythm against the wood. "Stay here," Alistair said, his hand already reaching for the old shotgun he kept behind the door. In Serenity Creek, an unexpected visitor, especially during a storm like this, was rarely good news. Eleanor ignored him, her own sense of duty as ingrained as his. She grabbed a lantern, its yellow light pushing back the gloomy twilight that had fallen over the room. When her father unbolted and pulled open the door, the storm seemed to invade the clinic. The wind howled, and the rain blew in, cold and sharp. Framed in the doorway were two men, soaked to the bone, their faces grim. Between them, slung over a horse that was trembling with fear and exhaustion, was a third man. "Help him," one of the men yelled over the wind, his voice raw with desperation. "He's shot." "Dad." Alistair didn't hesitate. "Bring him in. Quickly." They half carried, half dragged the wounded man inside, the mud and rain from their boots instantly soiling the clean, scrubbed floorboards. They laid him on the examination table in the center of the room. He was unconscious, his face pale as death under a layer of mud and several days' growth of beard. He was dressed in dark, trail-worn clothes, and a dark, ugly stain was spreading across his left side, just below the ribs. A bullet wound. And a bad one. "What happened?" Alistair asked, his hands already at work, cutting away the blood-soaked shirt. "Ambush. A posse, maybe," the first man said, his eyes darting nervously around the room. "We need you to patch him up, Vac. We'll pay. Gold." Eleanor moved to her father's side, her professional calm taking over. She saw the wound. The bullet had gone in clean, but there was no exit wound. It was still inside him. "He's lost a lot of blood," she said, her voice steady. "We'll need to get that bullet out before infection sets in." As her father prepared his instruments, Eleanor began to clean the mud from the stranger's face. As she wiped away the grime, the man's features began to emerge. He was younger than she first thought, perhaps 30. It was a hard face, all sharp angles and unforgiving lines, but it was not a cruel one. There was a scar that cut through his right eyebrow, and his mouth was set in a firm, resolute line even in unconsciousness. It was a face that held 1,000 dangerous stories. It was then that she saw it. As his head lolled to the side, his neck was exposed. There, just below his ear, was a small, distinctive tattoo, a coiled serpent eating its own tail. The Arboros. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. She had seen that mark before. It was in a stack of wanted posters the territorial marshal had left with the sheriff months ago. A poster for a man wanted for train robberies, bank heists, and the killing of 3 lawmen. A man so elusive, so skilled at vanishing without a trace, that the papers had given him a nickname. "Father," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Look." Alistair followed her gaze to the tattoo. His face, already grim, seemed to age 10 years in an instant. He knew the mark as well as she did. They were not just treating a wounded outlaw. They were treating a legend. Silas the Ghost Kane, the most wanted man in the territory, was lying on their table, bleeding all over their floor. The two men who had brought him saw the look of recognition on the doctor's face. The friendly one's hand drifted towards his pistol. "Doc," he said, his voice now holding a quiet menace. "You're a doctor. You took an oath. You help anyone who comes to your door." "I am aware of my oath," Alistair said, his voice cold. He looked from the gun on the man's hip to the dying man on his table. "But I am also a citizen of this town. Harboring a wanted fugitive is a hanging offense." A long, tense silence filled the room, broken only by the roar of the storm and the shallow, ragged breathing of Silas Kane. Eleanor looked at her father. She saw the conflict in his eyes, the war between his duty as a healer and his responsibility as a citizen. Then she looked at the man on the table. He was not a legend right now. He was not the ghost. He was just a man, inches from death, whose life depended on them. Her own oath, the one she had made to herself in this very room, was simpler than her father's. She was here to heal. The judgment of a man's soul was a matter for God and the law, not for a doctor with a scalpel. "We have to help him, Father," she said, her voice firm, leaving no room for argument. "Whatever he is, whatever he's done, he is our patient. Right now, that's all that matters." Alistair looked at his daughter, at the unyielding compassion in her eyes, a trait she had inherited from her late mother. He sighed, a sound of profound weariness, and gave a single, sharp nod. The decision was made. He turned to Kane's men. "You can stay until the storm breaks. Then you ride. And you don't come back. You leave him here. If he lives, he's my patient, not your leader. When he is well enough to travel, he will leave as well. Is that understood?" The men looked at each other, then at their dying boss. They knew it was the only chance he had. The friendly one nodded. "Understood, Doc." As her father began the delicate, bloody work of probing for the bullet, Eleanor held the lantern high. Its light fell on Silas Kane's face. At that moment, his eyes fluttered open. They were a startling, pale gray, the color of a winter sky, and they were filled with a lucid, burning intensity that belied his grave condition. They were not the eyes of a monster. They were the eyes of a man in terrible pain, a man clinging to life with a fierce, primal will. His gaze met hers, and for a long, breathless moment, the world outside, the storm, the danger, all of it faded away. In that moment, she was not a doctor's daughter, and he was not a wanted outlaw. They were just a man and a woman, connected by a thread of life she now held in her hands. Just as her father extracted the flat and lead bullet with a quiet "got it," another sound joined the storm. It was the sound of a horse, moving at a steady, determined pace, and the jingle of a harness. It was a sound every citizen in the territory knew and respected. It was the sound of the law. Eleanor rushed to the window, wiping away the condensation. Through the sheets of rain, she saw a lone rider, a tall, broad-shouldered man in a black slicker, dismounting in front of the sheriff's office. Even from a distance, she recognized him. Marshal Jedediah Stone, the very man whose name was on the bottom of Silas Kane's wanted poster. The relentless lawman who had been hunting the ghost for over 2 years. She turned from the window, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. They had just invited the devil in their front door. And now, their archangel of judgment was standing on their doorstep. Her predictable life was over. It had ended the moment she had looked into the winter gray eyes of the outlaw on her table. The hours that followed were a waking nightmare of whispered conversations and shared, furtive glances. Marshal Jedediah Stone did not leave. He took a room at the boarding house, his presence settling over the small town like a second, colder storm. He was a man who radiated an aura of unbending purpose, his face a mask of grim determination that seemed to have been carved from the same granite as the mountains he patrolled. He let it be known that he was on the trail of the Silas Kane gang, that they had been spotted heading into the high country, and that he intended to use Serenity Creek as his base of operations until the storm cleared and the hunt could resume. For Eleanor and her father, every knock on the door, every footstep on the porch, sent a fresh wave of ice through their veins. They moved the unconscious Silas Kane from the main examination room to a small, hidden sick room at the back of the clinic, a room once used for quarantine during a cholera scare. It had a sturdy door with a bolt and a single, high window that looked out onto the empty scrubland behind the town. It was as secure a place as they could offer. Kane's men, true to their word, had vanished with the first break in the storm, melting back into the wilderness like the phantoms they were, leaving behind a heavy bag of gold coins that Alistair refused to touch. It sat on his desk, a glittering, malevolent temptation, a payment for a sin they were now committing every second of every day. For 3 days, Silas Kane hovered in the gray, twilight world between life and death. A fever took him, a product of the dirty bullet and the hours he'd spent bleeding in the rain. He was delirious, tossing and turning, his sleep filled with mumbled names and fragmented images of violence. "Cyrus the bridge, leave it," he'd cry out, his body rigid with some remembered terror. Eleanor became his constant guardian. She sat by his bedside, bathing his face with cool water, forcing broth and willow bark tea between his cracked lips, and changing his bandages. In these long, quiet hours, she studied him. She saw the network of scars on his hands and arms, the testament to a life of violence. But she also saw the vulnerability of him, the way the fever stripped away the legend and left only a man. She found herself listening to his fevered ramblings not with judgment, but with a strange, compelling curiosity. She was piecing together the puzzle of the man, not the outlaw. On the 4th day, the fever broke. Eleanor was dozing in a chair by his bed when a sound woke her. It was her name, Eleanor. The voice was not the delirious rasp she had grown used to. It was quiet, hoarse, but steady. She opened her eyes. He was awake. His pale gray eyes were clear and focused, and they were watching her. "How do you know my name?" she asked, her heart giving a sudden, nervous flutter. "I've been listening," he said, a faint ghost of a smile touching his lips. "You and your father. You saved my life." "That's our job," she said, her professional calm returning, a welcome shield. She felt his forehead. "The fire was gone. The fever's broken. You're lucky. The bullet missed anything vital." "I don't believe in luck," he said, his gaze unwavering. "I believe in choices. You made one." He tried to push himself up, and a sharp hiss of pain escaped his lips. "Don't move," she ordered, gently pushing him back down. "You've got a long way to go before you're healed. You're safe here, for now." "Safe," he echoed, the word tasting of irony. "There's a U.S. Marshal in town who has been hunting me for 2 years. I can hear him from my window, talking to your sheriff. I wouldn't call that safe." His perception, his awareness of the world even from his sick, was unnerving. "Marshal Stone is a determined man," she admitted. "He's a bloodhound," Kane corrected, his voice flat. "And he's caught my scent. Which means he's caught yours, too. You and your father. You're in danger. Because of me." It was a simple statement of fact, with no hint of apology. He was a creature of a world where danger was a constant, and he understood its rules. The weight of her choice, the one she had made so easily in the heat of the moment, now settled on her with a no, chilling gravity. It was one thing to heal a man. It was another to lie to a U.S. Marshal, to become an accomplice, to put her father and their life in jeopardy. Over the next week, a strange, secret world formed within the walls of the small sick room. During the day, Eleanor and her father maintained the fiction of their normal lives, treating the town's minor ailments, smiling politely at Marshal Stone, and pretending the back room was empty. But at night, the clinic became a sanctuary and a prison. Eleanor would bring Silas his meals, change his dressing, and, against her better judgment, she would talk to him. She found he was not the boorish, arrogant killer she might have expected. He was quiet, intelligent, and possessed a dry, cynical wit. He asked her about her life, about the town, about the books she read. He listened with an intensity that made her feel as though she were the most interesting person in the world. She, in turn, found herself asking questions. She did not ask about the robberies or the killings. She asked about the scar over his eye, a fall from a horse as a boy. She asked how he learned to be so silent by listening to the world more than he spoke to it. She was chipping away at the legend, looking for the man buried beneath. One night, he asked her why she did it. "Why risk everything for a man like me?" She thought for a moment. "My mother died of the fever when I was a girl," she said quietly. "My father did everything he could, but it wasn't enough. I swore that day that I would never stand by and watch someone die if I had the power to stop it. I don't care what you've done. When you were on that table, you were just a man in need of a healer." He looked at her, his pale gray eyes holding an emotion she couldn't quite decipher. It was a look of profound, weary sadness, and something else, a flicker of admiration. "You see the world in simpler terms than I do, Eleanor Vance. Perhaps you see it in terms that are more complicated than they need to be," she countered. Their relationship was becoming a dangerous, delicate dance. She was his healer, his jailer, and she was beginning to fear his only friend. He in turn was her patient, her secret, her prisoner, and a window into a world of freedom and danger that was both terrifying and intoxicatingly alluring. She found herself looking forward to their late-night conversations, to the quiet intensity of his gaze. The safe, predictable life she had always valued was beginning to feel less like a sanctuary and more like a cage. The secret they shared was a bond, but it was also a fuse. And it was growing shorter every day, as Marshall Stone's patient, watchful presence began to feel less like an investigation and more like a siege. Marshall Jedediah Stone was a man who understood that a hunt was not a sprint, it was a siege. He had cornered his quarry, not in a box canyon, but in a valley of secrets, and he would simply wait until the pressure he applied caused the walls to crack. He did not harass the townspeople. He became a part of their daily rhythm, a constant, looming presence. He would sit on the porch of the general store, whittling a piece of wood, his gaze sweeping the street, his mind cataloging every interaction, every nervous glance. His focus, from the very beginning, had been on the doctor and his daughter. He knew the code of frontier doctors. They were a strange, stubborn breed who often saw their oath as a higher law than any territorial statute. Dr. Vance was a good man, respected. But he was also a man who would, Stone suspected, follow his conscience, even if it led him to break the law. And his daughter, there was a strength in her, a quiet fire that Stone found both admirable and suspicious. After a week of observation, he made his move. He walked into the clinic on the pretense of a headache, a flimsy excuse that neither he nor Alistair Vance believed for a second. The air in the clinic was thick with unspoken tension. "Doctor," Stone said, his voice a calm, low baritone. "I'll be plain. I tracked Silas Kane and his men to the mouth of this valley. The storm hit, and the trail was washed away. But a man like Kane doesn't just disappear. He's wounded. My sources tell me one of my posse got a shot in him. A wounded man needs a doctor. And you're the only one for 100 miles. Alistair cleaned his spectacles, a gesture designed to buy him a moment to compose his thoughts. "Marshall, I can assure you, if a man like Silas Kane had come to my door, you would have been the first to know." It was a carefully worded lie, and they both knew it. Stone's gaze shifted to Eleanor. "And you, Miss Vance? You've seen no strangers. No one seeking aid after the storm." Eleanor met his piercing blue eyes without flinching, her heart a frantic bird in her chest. The lies she had been telling herself, that she was just a healer, that this had nothing to do with the law, crumbled in the face of this direct confrontation. She was a liar, an accomplice. "No, Marshall," she said, her voice steady. "We've seen no one." The marshal held her gaze for a long moment, a silent battle of wills. Then he gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "I see," he said. He did not press the issue. He didn't have to. He had seen the flicker of fear in the doctor's eyes, the defiant but brittle courage in his daughter's. He had confirmed his suspicion. Kane was here. The net was tightening. He would simply wait for them to make a mistake. The marshal's visit shattered the fragile peace within the clinic. The danger was no longer a distant threat. It was in the room with them, breathing down their necks. Silas, who had overheard the entire exchange from the back room, knew his time was up. "I have to leave," he told Eleanor that night. He was stronger now, able to sit up, to walk a few paces. The wound was healing cleanly, a testament to her diligent care. "Every day I stay here, I'm putting a noose on your father's neck. And yours." "You're not strong enough," she protested. "You'll never make it out of the valley." "I've survived worse," he said, his face grim. "But I won't survive a hangman's rope. And neither will you." His words hit her with the force of a physical blow. He was right. Her compassion, her choice, had led them to this precipice. She had fallen into a moral quicksand, and every moment she held him here, they all sank a little deeper. That night, their conversation changed. The cautious dance of getting to know one another was over, replaced by a raw, desperate urgency. He told her of his life, not of the robberies, but of the crushing poverty of his childhood, of the choice he had made to become a wolf in a world that devoured sheep. He spoke of the legend of the ghost as if it were a separate person, monster he had created that he could no longer control. "Do you ever think about what might have been?" she asked him, her voice a near whisper. "If you had made a different choice?" He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw the full, crushing weight of his regret. "Every day," he said, his voice thick with an emotion she had never heard from him before. "I see a place like this. I see a man with a home, with a family. And I wonder," his gaze was so intense, so filled with a shared and spoken longing, that Eleanor felt as though the air had been stolen from her lungs. In that moment, he was not Silas Kane, the outlaw. He was just a man, filled with a desperate yearning for the very peace and simplicity she had always taken for granted. And she was no longer Eleanor Vance, the sensible doctor's daughter. She was a woman looking at a man she was beginning to care for deeply, a man she had saved only to condemn. He reached out, his hand covering hers where it rested on the arm of the chair. His touch was warm and firm, a spark that lit a fire deep within her. The world shrank to the small, lamplit room, to the space between them. He leaned closer, his pale gray eyes searching hers. The safe, predictable world she had known was a distant memory. This was her world now, dangerous and certain, and more alive than she had ever felt. A floorboard creaked in the outer room. Her father. The moment was broken. Silas pulled his hand back, the spell shattered, a wall of caution falling back into place in his eyes. "Tomorrow night," he said, his voice once again the flat, hard tone of the outlaw. "The marshal makes his rounds at midnight. That's when I'll leave." She nodded, unable to speak, her heart a tangled knot of fear and a new, terrifying, and undeniable love. She had fallen for the outlaw, and now she was about to help him escape, an act that would not just be a lie, but a final, irrevocable step into his world, a step from which there would be no return. The night Silas left was as still and quiet as the night he had arrived had been violent. A sliver of moon hung in the inky, star-dusted sky, offering just enough light to turn the familiar shapes of the town into dark, menacing silhouettes. Eleanor watched from the high window of the sickroom as Marshal Stone made his final, predictable patrol, his tall form a solitary, implacable shadow moving down the main street before disappearing into the boarding house. The window of opportunity was open. Silas was dressed in a set of plain, dark clothes her father had left for him. He moved with a stiff, pained grace, but the weakness was gone, replaced by the coiled, efficient energy of a predator. In his hand, he held a small, leather pouch. "This is for your father," he said, handing it to her. It was heavy with the weight of gold coins. "For the trouble." "He won't take it," she said. "Then you take it," he insisted. "You might need it." He looked at her, his face unreadable in the dim light. "I owe you more than I can ever repay, Eleanor Vance. You showed me a kindness I had forgotten existed." The space between them crackled with unspoken words. Her heart ached with a sense of loss so profound it felt like a physical wound. She had saved this man's life, only to send him back into a world that would surely claim it. "Where will you go?" she whispered. "Somewhere the name Kane is just a name," he said, though they both knew such a place didn't exist. He reached out, his calloused fingers gently touching her cheek. "Be safe," he murmured. And then he was gone, a phantom slipping out the back door and melting into the darkness. Eleanor stood there for a long time, her hand on her cheek where his touch still burned, a hollow ache in her chest. She had done the right thing. She had saved her father and herself from the marshal's noose. But it felt like she had just amputated a part of her own soul. The sanctuary of secrets was empty now, and her safe, predictable life, which had once been a comfort, now felt like a prison sentence. The silence of the clinic was no longer peaceful. It was deafening. Meanwhile, Silas moved through the wilderness with the instinct of an animal returning to its natural habitat. The 2 weeks of rest and care had done their work. He was not at full strength, but he was alive, and he was free. His first objective was survival. He made his way to a secret cache he kept in the foothills, a hollowed-out log containing a spare pistol, ammunition, and some supplies. His plan was to head for the lawless territory in the south, perhaps cross the border into Mexico, and find a place where the legend of the ghost could finally die. But the world had other plans. As he was making a cold camp by a stream, two riders found him. They were not lawmen. They were his own kind. One of them he recognized instantly, Cortland Court Jessup, a brutal, opportunistic killer who had ridden with his gang a year ago. Well, Court sneered, his hand resting on the butt of his pistol. Look what the cat dragged in. Heard you lost your touch, ghost. Heard a posse almost put you in the ground. You heard wrong, Silas said, his body tense, his mind calculating the odds. I don't think so, Court said, his eyes glinting with greed. I also heard you, and the boys took that army payroll up on the high pass. And then you conveniently disappeared. Me and the boys, we figure you was a piece of that score. Your old partners are getting restless, Silas. They want their cut. Silas knew what this was. An ultimatum. His old life, the one he was so desperate to escape, was reaching out to drag him back. There is no cut, Silas said, his voice cold. That life is over. Court laughed. It's never over. Not when there's 50,000 in gold in play. He drew his gun. You're going to tell us where you stashed it, ghost? Or we're going to take you apart, piece by piece. The gunfight was over before Court's partner could even clear his leather. Silas, diving for the cover of a rock, drew his own weapon with the fluid speed that had made him a legend. His first shot took Court's partner in the shoulder, sending him toppling from his horse. His second kicked up the dirt at Court's feet, making him flinch. It was a warning. But Court was not just greedy, he was stupid. He fired back, a wild shot that ricocheted off the rocks. Silas's third shot was not a warning. It was a final answer. It struck Court square in the chest. He stood over the dying man, no triumph in his victory. This was the world he had tried to leave behind. A world of greed, betrayal, and pointless death. As he looked at Court's face, a new, cold dread began to form in his gut. Court had found him, which meant others were looking. And a man like Court, cornered and desperate, would not have come without leverage. He would have learned everything he could. He would have learned about Serenity Creek, about the doctor, and about the doctor's daughter. The realization hit Silas with the force of a physical blow. By running, he had not saved Eleanor. He had marked her as his weakness. He had painted a target on her back. His past was not just his own prison, it was now a cage he had inadvertently built around the only person who had ever shown him a shred of grace. The safety Eleanor had felt after Silas's departure was a fragile, fleeting thing. It was replaced by a hollow emptiness and the constant, nagging fear of the unknown. Marshall Stone, finding his quarry had vanished, had finally left town, his parting look a silent promise that the hunt was not over. But his absence did not bring relief. It only left a void, a space once filled with a thrilling, terrifying secret. Her life returned to its predictable rhythms. She helped her father, she tended her garden, she spoke with her neighbors. But the world seemed to have lost its color. The quiet she had once cherished now felt like a form of deafness. She found her thoughts drifting constantly to a man with winter gray eyes, wondering where he was, if he was safe, if he was even alive. The answer came on a hot, sun-bleached afternoon, 2 weeks after Silas had disappeared. A lone rider came into town. He was a hard-faced man with cold, dead eyes and a cruel twist to his lips. He moved with the swagger of a man who was used to taking what he wanted. He dismounted in front of the clinic, his spurs jingling a discordant, menacing rhythm in the quiet street. Eleanor was on the porch, sorting herbs. The man stopped at the bottom of the steps, his gaze sweeping over her in a way that made her skin crawl. This was not a man seeking a doctor. This was a predator sizing up its prey. "You'd be the doctor's daughter," he said, his voice a low, greasy drawl. "The pretty one." "I am Eleanor Vance," she replied, her voice colder than she felt, her hand instinctively tightening on the handle of her gardening trowel. "If you need a doctor, my father is inside." "Oh, I'm not here for the doc," he sneered, taking a step closer. "I'm here for you. See, a friend of yours, a fella by the name of Kane, seems to have misplaced something that belongs to me and my partners. A great deal of gold. And we have a feeling you might know where he, or it, might be." Eleanor's blood ran cold. This was one of them. One of the wolves from Silas's world. "I don't know who you're talking about," she lied, her heart hammering. The man chuckled. An ugly, humorless sound. Don't play coy. We know he was here. We know you patched him up. Word gets around. So you're going to tell me where he is, or I'm going to get my answers another way. And I promise you, you won't like it. He started up the steps, his hand dropping to the butt of his pistol. The street was empty. Her father was in the back, grinding herbs, deaf to the world. No one could help her. She was alone, trapped. She brandished the trowel, a pathetic defense against the monster before her. That's not his, voice said, low and cold as a grave. The outlaw on the steps froze. He turned slowly. Standing in the middle of the street, not 20 yards away, was Silas Kane. He was no longer the wounded patient. He was the ghost, in the flesh. He wore a dark duster, and his hand hovered over the pistol on his hip. His pale gray eyes were not weary now. They were chips of ice, radiating a lethal, focused calm. Kane, the man on the steps hissed, his hand tightening on his gun. Thought you'd run for the border. I changed my mind, Silas said. You're not going to touch her. You're going to get on your horse, and you're going to ride away from this town. And you are going to tell the rest of them that Serenity Creek is off limits. Tell them it's under my personal protection. If I ever see your face, or any of your friends' faces, in this valley again, I will hunt you down, and I will put you in the ground. That is my only warning. The outlaw, a man named Riggs, was caught between greed and a primal, instinctual fear. He looked at Silas, and he saw the legend, the killer who had never been caught. But he also saw weakness, the girl on the porch. You've gone soft, ghost, Riggs snarled, and with a desperate, foolish bravado, he drew his gun, not on Silas, but on Eleanor. It was the last mistake he ever made. Before Riggs's gun had even cleared his holster, Silas's was in his hand. The street exploded with a single, deafening gunshot. Eleanor flinched, a scream catching in her throat. A neat, dark hole appeared in the center of Riggs's forehead. He stood there for a long, shocked moment, his gun clattering to the porch steps, before he collapsed like a puppet with its strings cut. Silence descended, thick and absolute. The townspeople, drawn by the shot, began to peer from their windows and doorways. They saw the dead man on the clinic porch. And they saw the legendary outlaw, Silas Kane, standing over him, a smoking pistol in his hand. He had saved her, but in doing so, he had exposed himself. He had revealed her as his weakness. He had brought his bloody, violent world crashing down into the heart of her peaceful, quiet one. The ghost was no longer a secret. He was real, and the consequences of their dangerous reunion were only just beginning. The single gunshot that killed Riggs was not an end, but a beginning. It was a declaration of war. Silas had drawn a line in the dust of Serenity Creek, claiming the town as his territory, and his old life had answered the challenge. Within a week, the wolves arrived. They were not a gang anymore. They were a pack of scavengers, drawn by the scent of gold and betrayal. Led by a ruthless, pragmatic killer named Marcus Thorny, a man who had been Silas's second-in-command. Remaining members of his old crew descended on the valley. They did not ride into town with guns blazing. They were more cunning than that. They took control of the high pass, the only way in or out of the valley, effectively cutting Serenity Creek off from the world. They controlled the town's lifeline. It was a siege. Thorne sent a single rider with a message, a piece of paper nailed to the church door. The terms were simple. Silas Kane was to deliver the $50,000 from the army payroll to them at the pass. If he did, they would leave and never return. If he did not, or if anyone tried to leave or enter the valley, they would start burning the outlying homesteads, one by one, until their demands were met. The town, which had only known peace, was now a prison. Fear, a commodity more potent than gold, became the new currency. The town council met, their faces grim. The sheriff, a good man but one more accustomed to dealing with lost cattle than with a siege by hardened outlaws, was out of his depth. Their anger and fear found a natural target, not the outlaws in the hills, but the one in their midst. He brought this on us, one man shouted at the meeting, pointing an accusing finger at Silas, who stood at the back of the room, a silent, grim-faced observer. His fight is not our fight. Give them what they want. Give them Kane. Eleanor, standing beside Silas, felt a surge of protective fury. That man is dead because he was threatening me, she countered, her voice ringing with a strength she didn't know she possessed. Silas saved my life. These men in the hills are the enemy, not him. But her words were drowned out by the chorus of fear. The town was turning on him. And Silas, his face an unreadable mask, knew it was inevitable. He had tried to protect this place, and in doing so, had made it a target. That night, he came to her at the clinic. "I have to end this," he said, his voice heavy with the weight of his decision. "There's no $50,000. We spent it, gambled it, lost it months ago. It was a lie I told to keep the pack together. Thorn knows that. He's not here for the gold. He's here for me, for revenge." "What are you going to do?" she asked, a cold dread gripping her. "I'm going to give them what they want," he said. "I'm going to give them me." He explained his plan. He would ride up to the pass alone and confront Thorn and his men. A final, desperate gambit to draw them into a fight away from the town, to end the threat to Serenity Creek by sacrificing himself. "It's suicide," she whispered, her heart breaking. "It's the only choice I have left," he said. He looked at her, his pale gray eyes filled with a profound and sorrowful tenderness. "You gave me back my life, Eleanor. I'm not going to let the cost of it be yours." Before she could argue, before she could plead, he leaned in and kissed her. It was not a kiss of passion, but of a desperate, final goodbye. It was the taste of regret, of a future that would never be. And then he was gone, a solitary figure walking into the night to face the ghosts of his own creation. Silas did not ride to the past to die. He rode to wage a one-man war. He was not just a gunman, he was a master tactician, a ghost who knew how to use the terrain and the darkness as his greatest weapons. He approached the Outlaws' camp not from the main trail, but from the high, treacherous goat paths of the mountainside, a route no one would expect. He spent the hours before dawn turning the pass into a killing ground. He used his knowledge of the land to set a series of traps, not deadly ones, but diversions. A small rock slide rigged to a tripwire. A series of dry branches arranged to snap like rifle fire when disturbed. His goal was not to annihilate the enemy, but to create chaos, to disorient them, to make his single gun sound like an army. At first light, he made his presence known. A single, perfectly aimed rifle shot from a high ridge took out the Outlaw's coffee pot, sending a shower of scalding liquid and grounds over their campfire. The shot echoed through the pass like a crack of doom. "Thorn," Silas's voice boomed down from the rocks, seeming to come from everywhere at once. "Your fight is with me. Leave the town out of it." Thorn and his men, startled from their complacency, grabbed their rifles and fired wildly at the cliffs where they had seen the muzzle flash. This was the reaction Silas had counted on. As they wasted their ammunition on an empty position, he was already moving, circling to a new vantage point. The battle for the pass became a lethal game of cat and mouse. Silas used his traps to sow confusion, making the Outlaws believe they were being attacked from multiple directions. He would fire a shot, then trigger a rock slide 100 yards away, drawing their fire and allowing him to move again, unseen. He was a phantom, picking them off one by one, not with killing shots, but with shots to the leg, the shoulder, disabling them, taking them out of the fight. He was fighting a war of attrition, trying to break their will. But Thorn was a cunning and experienced foe. He realized he was being played. He saw the pattern. He was not fighting a posse, he was fighting one man. The ghost. "Spread out," Thorn roared at his remaining men. "He's alone. Find him. $1,000 to the man who brings me his head." The dynamic shifted. The hunters became the hunted. Silas was no longer controlling the engagement. He was now on the run, dodging bullets as Thorn's men fanned out through the rocks, tightening the noose. The pass he had turned into a trap was now in danger of becoming his tomb. He was wounded, a bullet having grazed his arm, and he was running out of ammunition. The Outlaw's last stand was on the verge of becoming his final failure. Back in Serenity Creek, Eleanor was living her own personal hell. She could hear the distant, echoing gunshots from the pass, each report a hammer blow against her heart. The townspeople were huddled in their homes praying, waiting for their fate to be decided. But Eleanor could not wait. The woman who had sworn an oath to never stand by while someone died could not stand by now. She went to her father. "I'm going up there," she said, her voice resolute. "Eleanor, that's madness," he protested, his face etched with fear. "You'll be killed. He's going to die up there, alone for us," she said, her eyes blazing with a fire he had never seen before. I can't let that happen. I am not a fighter, but I am a doctor. And if there are wounded men, I can help. Perhaps I can reason with them. It was a desperate, naive plan, but it was all she had. Before her father could stop her, she was gone, her medical bag in one hand, a white flag, a torn piece of bedsheet tied to a stick in the other. She did not take a horse. She went on foot, a small, solitary figure of peace walking into a war zone. She reached the mouth of the pass as the gunfire was at its most intense. She could hear men shouting, cursing. She took a deep breath, held the white flag high, and walked into the open. "Stop shooting," she cried out, her voice surprisingly strong. "I am a doctor. I am here to help the wounded." The shooting faltered. The sudden appearance of a lone woman with a white flag was so unexpected, so contrary to the brutal logic of their gunfight, that it momentarily stunned both sides. Thorn was the first to react. He saw her, and a slow, cruel smile spread across his face. The ghost's weakness had just walked right into his hands. "Hold your fire," he yelled to his men. He stepped out from behind a boulder, his rifle trained on her. Well, look what we have here." The ghost's little angel of mercy. At the same time, Silas saw her from his position high in the rocks. A wave of pure, cold terror washed over him, a fear more profound than he had ever felt for his own life. She had just undone everything he had been trying to achieve. She had just signed her own death warrant. "Eleanor, get back," he roared, breaking his cover. It was the mistake Thorn had been waiting for. Now, he knew exactly where Silas was. He and his remaining men turned their rifles and unleashed a volley of fire at Silas's position, pinning him down. "It's over, Ghost," Thorn yelled, grabbing Eleanor and pulling her in front of him, a human shield. "You have a choice. Throw down your guns and walk out here with your hands up, or watch me kill her." The world seemed to stop. Silas was trapped, his rifle empty. Thorn held Eleanor, his gun to her head. The siege of the pass had ended in a checkmate, and the life of the queen was the price. The standoff on the pass was a frozen tableau of impossible choices. Eleanor stood trembling in Thorn's grasp, the cold steel of his pistol against her temple. High above, Silas was pinned down, disarmed and helpless, forced to watch the woman he loved held hostage. "Your choice, Ghost." Thorn's voice was a triumphant snarl. "Your legend, or her life." For Silas, there was no choice. The legend of the ghost had been a curse, a prison of his own making. It had brought him nothing but blood and loneliness. This woman, in the short time he had known her, had shown him the possibility of something more. Her life was worth more than 1,000 legends. Slowly, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender, Silas stepped out from behind the rocks. He was exposed, vulnerable. He held his empty rifle in one hand. "That's it," Thorn chuckled. "The great Silas Kane. Not so ghostly now, are you?" But as Silas began his slow, careful descent, another sound echoed through the canyon. It was the thunder of a dozen horses, moving at a full gallop, and at their head was the unmistakable, implacable figure of Marshal Jedediah Stone. He had seen Eleanor leave town, and he had made a choice. He had ridden hard to the nearest army outpost, telling the commander that Serenity Creek was under attack by the remnants of the Kane gang. He had returned not just as a lawman, but as the leader of a cavalry detachment. They stormed the pass, their rifles blazing. Thorn and his men, caught completely by surprise between Silas on the cliffs and the charging lawmen on the trail, were thrown into chaos. Thorn, his plan crumbling, hit a final, desperate move. He shoved Eleanor to the ground and raised his rifle for a final shot at Silas. But Eleanor was not a passive victim. As she fell, she grabbed a loose rock and threw it with all her might, striking Thorn's arm. The shot went wide, ricocheting harmlessly off the canyon wall. In that same instant, 2 shots rang out, almost simultaneously. One was from Marshal Stone's rifle. The other was from a pistol that had appeared, as if by magic, in Silas's hand. Small Derringer Eleanor's father had pressed on him before he left. Both bullets found their mark. Marcus Thorn collapsed in the dust, his reign of terror over. The canyon fell silent, the air thick with the smell of gunpowder and the sudden, shocking arrival of justice. The surviving outlaws threw down their guns, surrendering to the cavalry troopers. Silas slowly made his way down to the canyon floor. He and Marshal Stone met in the middle of the trail, the two old adversaries finally face to face, the battle over. Silas held out the derringer, offering it in surrender. Stone looked at the outlaw. He saw the wounds, the exhaustion. He saw the way his eyes kept flicking to Eleanor, who was now being helped to her feet by her father, who had followed her up the pass. The marshal had come here to capture a legend, but he had witnessed something else entirely. He had seen a man sacrifice everything for the woman he loved. "My report will state," the marshal said, his voice low and clear for only Silas to hear, "that the notorious outlaw Silas Kane was killed in this firefight, along with the rest of his gang. His body was lost in the chaos." Silas stared at him, stunned. "Why?" "Because my job is to bring justice to the territory, not to break a good woman's heart," Stone said. He looked over at Eleanor. "And because it seems to me that the ghost died in this past today anyway. Don't make a liar out of me." He turned and walked away, to oversee the cleanup of the battle, leaving Silas Kane standing in the dust, a free man. The town of Serenity Creek did not forget. They had been to the brink, and a man they had feared had pulled them back. When Silas walked back into the valley, not as a prisoner, but as a survivor, they did not meet him with suspicion, but with a quiet, grateful respect. He met Eleanor on the porch of the clinic, the same place where a dead man had lain just a day before. The world was quiet now. The storm had passed. "It's over," he said, the words feeling strange and new. "The legend is," she replied softly, "but the man is still here." He knew what she was offering. A life. A home. A sanctuary. The very things he had ridden away from. The very things he had come back to protect. "I'm still a wanted man, Eleanor," he said, the old ghost dying hard. "There will always be another Marshal Stone, another bounty hunter. Then we'll face them together," she said, her voice filled with an unshakable certainty. She took his scarred hand in hers. "You once said you didn't believe in luck, that you believed in choices. I'm choosing you, Silas. The man, not the legend." He looked into her eyes and saw his future. It would not be easy. The shadow of his past would always be there. But for the first time, it was a shadow he would not have to face alone. He had ridden into Serenity Creek as a wounded outlaw seeking refuge. He had found something far more valuable. He had found a reason to heal. His sanctuary was no longer a hidden cache or a secret trail. It was the steady, capable hands of a doctor's daughter. He had fallen for the woman who had saved his life, and in doing so, he had finally saved himself. His love for her was, and always would be, as dangerous as his legend. But for the first time in his life, it was a danger he was willing to face.